A representative of the libertarian view of free will is Richard Taylor, an American philosopher who lived from 1919 to 2003. He discusses this view in Chapter 4 of his book, Metaphysics. Taylor defines determinism as follows.
In the case of everything that exists, there are antecedent conditions, known or unknown, given which the thing could not be other than it is. Every cause is the effect of some cause or causes.
Taylor claims that we all believe this principle of determinism, whether we're aware of it or not. We show our acceptance of it whenever we seek an explanation for something that has happened. For example, what made that noise? Or for the condition of some object. For example, why do I have this rash? We seek such explanations, answers to such questions, because we want to know the causes of things. Because knowing a cause can give us some control over its effects. We can stop the noise. We can make the rash go away. But Taylor realizes, of course, that if determinism is true of us, then freedom and moral responsibility become problematic.
What am I but a helpless product of nature, destined by her to do whatever I do, and to become whatever I become? What then becomes of my responsibility for my behavior, and of the control over my conduct that I fancy myself to possess?
But Taylor thinks questions of morality and moral responsibility are very difficult to answer, and he's surely right about this. So instead of arguing that we must have free will because we're moral beings, he argues that we must have free will because we have a capacity for deliberation, and also because it's sometimes up to us what we do. These are, he says, of course, de Holbach argued that this is all illusion. But Taylor disagrees. He says these are indisputable facts about us. And he argues that since determinism is inconsistent with them, determinism must be false. Taylor points out the following facts about deliberation. First, you can only deliberate about your own behavior. Deliberation is an attempt to decide something, to make up your mind. You can't deliberate about what someone else will do. You can't make up someone else's mind. At best, you can make up your mind about what you will try to make them do, either by persuading them or physically forcing them. Second, you can deliberate only about future actions, not past or present ones. It makes no sense to try to make up your mind about what to do yesterday, or about whether or not to do something you're presently doing. Third, you can only deliberate about what to do if you don't already know what you're going to do. It makes no sense to try to decide whether or not to go to the movies, for example, if you've already decided to go, or to try to decide whether or not to fall after you've jumped out a window. And finally, you can only deliberate about what to do if you believe that it's up to you what you will do. It would make no sense to try to decide whether or not to cross the street, for example, if you believe that there are police barricades at the curb, or to try to decide whether or not to keep seeing someone if you believe that the person you had been seeing doesn't want to see you anymore. Taylor has this to say about its being up to me what I do.
If I say that it is up to me how I move my finger, I mean that I can move it in this way and I can move it in that way, and not merely that it can move or be moved in this way and that. I mean that the movement of my finger is within my direct control.
He points out that the can and I can move it in this way and I can move it in that way is a causal or physical can, not a logical can. What's physically possible concerns what can and cannot be according to the laws of nature. What's logically possible concerns what can and cannot be according to the laws of logic. And physical and logical possibility are not the same thing. There are lots of things that are not physically possible that are logically possible. Singing and dancing frogs, for example. Anything that's not logically contradictory is logically possible, even if it isn't physically possible. Related to logical and physical possibility are logical and physical necessity. What is physically necessary is what must be according to the laws of nature. For example, water must boil at 100 degrees centigrade at sea level, and light must travel at 186,000 miles, or 300 million meters, per second in a vacuum. What is logically necessary is what must be according to the laws of logic. For example, any sentence of the form P or not P must be true. Likewise, theorems in mathematics. And lots of things that are physically necessary are not logically necessary. For example, though it's physically necessary that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade at sea level, it's not logically necessary. It's logically possible for water to boil at, say, 50 degrees centigrade at sea level. And it's not logically necessary that light travels at 186,000 miles per second in a vacuum. Logically speaking, it could be slower or faster. Now, determinism doesn't say that whatever happens is logically necessary. It says that whatever happens is physically necessary. In the free will debate, to say that one could have acted differently is not to say that this is logically possible. It's to say that it's physically possible. And this is what determinism seems to rule out. Taylor characterizes its being up to me what I do as follows. If it's up to me what I do, then I'm free with respect to what I do. And this has two important implications. First, there is no external impediment or obstacle preventing me from doing it. And second, that there is no external constraint or compulsion forcing me to do it. No conditions external to the mind prevent me from doing it. I'm not tied up, paralyzed, encased in carbonite, or whatever. And no conditions external to the mind force me to do it. I'm not a human marionette or ventriloquist dummy. I'm not in free fall. No one is pushing me around, etc. Now, so far, this is consistent with soft determinism, which says that determinism is true. Voluntary behavior is free to the extent that it's not externally prevented or compelled, and the causes of voluntary behavior are
certain states, events, or conditions within the agent himself, namely his own acts of will or volitions, choices, decisions, and so on.
But soft determinism is consistent with acts of will, choices, decisions, etc. themselves being entirely causally determined by inner or outer conditions. And Taylor argues that this isn't enough for freedom. We need what Taylor calls agency. He argues that the only conception of humans that's consistent with deliberation and control is one on which we are, at least sometimes, self-determining beings. That is, as he says,
beings which are sometimes the causes of their own behavior.
The kind of causation involved cannot be physical causation. We have seen that physical causation, insofar as it's deterministic, is inconsistent with freedom. What we need is what's called agent causation. Persons, or agents, are rational beings, that is, beings who act for reasons. Reasons are psychological states, such as beliefs and desires. They explain why we do what we do, but they are not causes of our actions. We are the causes of our actions on this conception, and we cause them for reasons. That is, reasons determine what we ought to do, what it's rational to do, but they don't determine what we in fact do. We act for reasons, but reasons do not make us act. We act from reasons. Agents are beginnings of causal chains, and this seems to imply that agents or persons are non-physical beings. Supernatural in the sense that they are above or outside of the natural world, and not subject to the laws of nature. Yet they are still able to effect changes in the physical world. They are like Aquinas' God, uncaused causers. This is a dualistic conception. It conceives of us as constituted by a physical part, the body, and a non-physical part, the mind or person. This was Descartes' conception of the person or mind or soul and her body. This conception, which seems to be required for the libertarian, however, has a serious problem. The problem of mind-body interaction, which we have very good reason to think actually occurs. So, the mind can be affected by the body, as for example when injury to the body causes pain, or filling the stomach with food causes a feeling of satisfaction, or movement of the body causes a sensation of motion. And likewise, the body can be affected by the mind, as for example when desire to avoid injury causes avoidance of a damaging stimulus, or a feeling of hunger causes food-seeking and eating behavior, or a sensation of motion causes you to reach for support. The second, mind-to-body causation, is most relevant to agent causation. We want the mind to be above the physical, that is, supernatural, in order to exempt our decisions, intentions, etc. from determination by physical antecedents. But we also want it to be possible for the supernatural mind to affect changes in the natural world. Now, you may wonder how it's possible for something that's not physical to cause or originate changes in something that is physical. One of Descartes' students, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, expressed this problem with great clarity and force in her correspondence with Descartes. She wrote,
"Given that the soul of a human being is only a thinking substance, an immaterial entity, how can it affect the body in order to bring about voluntary actions? The question arises because it seems that how a thing moves depends solely on how much it is pushed, the manner in which it is pushed, and the surface, texture, and shape of the thing that pushes it. The first two of those require contact between the two things, and the third requires that the causally active thing be extended, take up space. But your notion of the soul entirely excludes extension, and it appears to me that an immaterial thing can't possibly touch anything else."
She was absolutely right about this, and Descartes did not have a good answer to her question. Elizabeth's problem is the agent causation theorist's problem. How could an immaterial self, which does not take up space and has no physical properties, produce changes in a material body? An agent causation theorist might say that this causation is basic, or primitive, or inexplicable, or even miraculous, the way God's interaction with the physical world is on Aquinas' view. But none of these seem very satisfying from a scientific or philosophical point of view, because nothing gets explained. So, like most philosophical problems, the problem of free will and determinism still has not been solved. But the question of whether we have free will or not is extremely important, and philosophers have not stopped trying to solve it. Here are just a few of the living philosophers who are doing important work on free will.